Debian is quite a major Linux distribution, being used as the base for many other distros, including Ubuntu and Kali Linux. Many other distros are based on Ubuntu as well, such as Linux Mint and Zorin OS. Debian 13 has just been released on August 9, 2025, after a little over 2 years of development. So, this is quite a major new release for the Linux community. So what has changed? Notable changes include a new Linux kernel, upgrading from the 6.1 kernel to the 6.12 kernel, as well as new versions of multiple desktop environments, including GNOME 48, KDE Plasma 6.3, and XFCE 4.20. Debian 13 has also dropped support for the i386 architecture, as there is no official kernel and no installer for i386 systems, and users of such systems are recommended to either reinstall Debian as AMD 64 or retire the old hardware if necessary. This doesn't mean that 32-bit software won't work anymore, but you can no longer install Debian on a purely 32-bit system. Debian 13 will also be the last version of Debian to support the ARM EABI architecture, and is also the first version of Debian to support 64-bit RISC-V hardware. If we go to the Debian homepage, we are immediately presented with a download link, which will download an ISO that will work for many people. However, Debian can be delivered in many other forms by clicking the Other Downloads button here. Here you can find packages for computers without an internet connection right here, live versions so that you can test the operating system before installing, and cloud images for web services such as Amazon Web Services. You can also buy install media if you would like. Note that not all options as of recording have Debian 13 media available, but the main downloads for the net install ISO right here, the larger complete DVD ISO, and the live desktop environment ISOs are all available. For our use case, we're going to go ahead and download the small installation image. We'll grab the AMD 64 version, and this is about 750 megabytes in size. This will work very well for people with a wired Ethernet connection, as well as virtual machines. This version lets you choose which desktop environment you wish to install as well. With the ISO downloaded, let's spin up our virtual machine where we will install Debian 13. We'll choose Graphical Install, set our location to United States, and keyboard to American English, as that is where I am. We'll keep it simple and stick with the default host name and not set a domain name. Now, it wants us to set a root password. However, I'm not going to do that so that we can use the sudo command to run commands as root. We'll now set a username and password, and set our time zone to Central. Here, we'll stick with all the defaults in terms of partitioning our disk, because that's easier, and then write the changes to the disk. After doing all that, the base Debian system is now installing. Here, we'll choose United States for our mirror country, and stick with the default choice for the mirror used by the package manager, as that is what is recommended. We don't need a proxy, so we'll skip over that. And now, we are asked if we want to participate in the package user survey. This sends statistics to the developers of Debian about the packages used on your system, so they can choose what will be included in future Debian releases. For this, since this is a temporary installation, I'm going to skip over this. Next, we get to choose our desktop environment. We have quite a few choices here, including GNOME, KDE Plasma, Mate, and Cinnamon. For now, we'll stick with the default choice of GNOME. However, we will take a brief look at some of the other desktop environments later on. It's also worth noting that we can install a Debian blend, which is basically a collection of software targeted towards specific groups of users with specialized uses, such as children, medical staff, or certain academic fields. We'll look into this later, but for now, we won't bother choosing a blend to install. With our desktop chosen, Debian will now continue on with the installation, which includes upgrading all software to the latest versions in the repositories. We'll now install the grub bootloader so our operating system can boot up. The default location is perfectly fine, especially since we don't have a ton of choice anyway. And with that, our installation of Debian 13 is complete. After a reboot, we are now in Debian 13. Let's just put in my password. And there we go. I think we're going to skip over taking a tour for now. So what is included in Debian 13? Well, we actually have a pretty small array of software by default, as you can see. However, there is enough to get you started. There is a web browser, of course, this particular one being Firefox ESR, as you can see. It's the Firefox Extended Support release. This will work perfectly fine, and of course you can switch to a more modern browser. You can switch to the main version of Firefox, or to another browser such as Brave, Chromium, or Google Chrome. There is also LibreOffice included, which will get you writing documents, making spreadsheets, and creating slideshows right away. With Debian 13 shipping with LibreOffice 25.2, the latest version, at the time of release. As selected during installation, we are running the GNOME desktop environment, specifically GNOME 48. This is the default desktop for Debian, and personally, not my preferred desktop environment if I had the choice. However, everything does tend to work quite well, and GNOME Tweaks is included right here, so we can make some changes quite easily. During installation, when we chose our desktop environment, we were presented with the opportunity to choose Debian blends. This gives us more specialized software depending on the choice of the blend based on our needs. Specifically, blends for astronomers, medical personnel, various sciences, and radio are included, with each blend giving different software. So, what does each blend include in terms of different software? Well, as seen before, here is what is included in a base Debian installation without any blend chosen. We have pretty much all basic utility software included on every computer, such as a calculator, calendar, an office suite, and a web browser. In total, about 1,380 packages are installed if you choose the GNOME desktop environment with no blend chosen. If we look at the Debian Science blend, it results in over 3,600 more packages being included. After installation, we can see just how many new packages are installed. All kinds of software for science-related fields have been installed, including LaTeX, R, and software for creating science-related diagrams and graphs. It also includes some non-graphical software, such as Java and Git. Debian Junior results in over 650 additional packages being installed, many of which seem to revolve around games and other software intended for younger audiences, such as 2048 and Sudoku. Interestingly, the VLC media player is also included by default with the Debian Junior blend. Debian Ham Radio results in almost 800 new packages being installed. This blend is intended for amateur and hobby radio interests. As you can see, there is a lot of radio-focused software, which, if you are interested in, would be quite nice to have. Debian Med is a blend focused on medical software, with over 3,700 additional packages installed on top of the base system. Here, you'll see some software that might be used by people in the medical field, as well as your typical other Linux software, like in all the previous blends. FreedomBox Home Server adds about 200 new packages, by far being the smallest of the available blends. As the name implies, this blend is largely intended for people who are going to run Debian for home server applications. Since this was intended for server applications, there are no new GUI applications in this blend. The last blend, Debian Astro, is, as the name might imply, an astronomy-focused blend, with almost 1,700 additional packages. However, unfortunately, due to an issue with the installation media, I am unable to actually install Debian 13 with the Astro blend. It fails during the software installation portion of setup, and for some reason, because of that, it also results in the grub bootloader not being able to be installed, so the system cannot boot. While I'm sure this can be fixed in some way, it was not something I was personally willing to troubleshoot. And no, it wasn't something related to my virtual machine, as I tried installing this blend on real hardware, as well as multiple hypervisors on multiple computers and operating systems, with each time failing at the same point. Personally, after looking through all the blends I was able to, I would just recommend that you install Debian without any blend, and then go and find whatever software you need for your use case, as I feel blends are just going to result in way more software that you will never use being installed. As shown earlier during installation, Debian includes quite a few desktop environments to choose from during installation. Jumping back into the installer, this time instead of choosing the GNOME desktop environment, I am going to choose the KDE Plasma desktop environment. This is a noteworthy desktop environment to be included, since this is the first version of Debian to include the new KDE Plasma 6, specifically 6.3. And here we are in Debian 13 with the KDE Plasma desktop environment. This has a similar look and feel to Windows in many ways, but is also quite different in its own ways as well. KDE is known for being highly customizable, and there is no shortness of that here as well. Interestingly, despite having all the same settings in terms of installation other than choosing the KDE desktop environment, under graphics we can see that GIMP, the GNU image manipulation program, is also included by default with Debian if you choose the KDE desktop environment. Another personal favorite desktop environment included with Debian is Cinnamon, which is developed by the team behind Linux Mint. Similar to KDE Plasma, it has a similar appearance to Windows, and in some ways is even closer to Windows than KDE. Once again, there is some more slightly unique software bundled with this desktop environment, including games such as 2048, as well as the Thunderbird email client and transmission for torrents. Finally, as to not make this video too long, we'll look at the XFCE desktop environment, which is another rather popular desktop environment. Once again, we have a unique list of software installed revolving around the XFCE desktop, along with everything else you need to get started running Debian 13. And on that note, that wraps up everything I wanted to show you about Debian 13. This is quite a great distro, and one that I will heavily consider using on a daily driver computer in the future. Thank you all for watching, and let me know what other Linux distros you want me to look at in the future.